And then it looks like folks are starting to come into the room, which is great. So we'll give a moment for everyone to be able to find their way into the Zoom room and turn their cameras on if you want, and make sure you're muted as always on the Zoom protocols. But welcome to everyone. This is our quarterly RevTech Labs Insurtech community meetup event. We have a great event today, a great conversation. Bryan Falchuk, noted author in the Insurtech space, someone that a lot of you probably already know or have heard of or read some of his stuff. Or if you're watching this after the recording session, the opportunity to hear his thoughts on it. Has published a number of books in the space, advises. We were just chatting before we went live. He's also mentoring in the GIA Insurtech program as well. So a good mentor for companies in this space as well. Today's topic is how to make compliance sexy again, or let's make compliance sexy again. It's interesting because compliance is such an important area in the insurance and the Insurtech space, but of course always gets the short end of the stick in terms of the sexiness meter. And while we've learned that culture can beat strategy, we'll see if sexy compliance can also beat strategy. We'll set a whole new trend of thought leadership and books. So Bryan, it's my pleasure to welcome you on today for our quarterly event. Thank you for being here with us. We appreciate it.
I appreciate that. And I think the toughest word in that whole title for this event might be the again part. That's the thing that people have been reaching out to me about. They're like, was it sexy before? And just, love and respect for the folks in compliance out there. You were sexy. We're going to get it back.
Yeah, that's right. Get the swagger back again.
Right.
And I know I did a really light introduction, but I'd love for you to do a little bit more introduction in terms of some of your background and expertise.
Sure.
You've got a wealth of experience, and I don't want to shortchange it. So why don't we just take a moment and introduce yourself to everyone and some of the work that you've been doing. And I know your first book is out and your second book is on the way, I think.
Yeah. So I'm an insurance vet. I've been in PNC for just over 20 years now, on the carrier side, but then also with McKinsey consulting to different PNC carriers. I spent a number of years running operations for a carrier in the U.S., and then I was a chief claims officer for another carrier before making the big leap to Insurtech. I joined a company I was an early customer of and saw the light, and had a lot of fun with them for a year doing sales. But in that process is sort of what led me to here is, selling to all these carriers and talking to all of these companies who really were experiencing what I felt when I was on the carrier side. And that's the sense of being stuck. And I really wanted to help them and newcomers in the industry move forward. So that's what I do with my work today. It's called Insurance Evolution Partners. And the purposes of my books at this point are really about helping the industry see how we can break through a lot of the constraints that we face, and compliance or regulation is one of them, and find a path forward, because not only can we change, but as we all learned in the past year, you have to. There's no more optionality in this, either because of the situation or the fact that from a consumer standpoint, whether it's personal or commercial consumers, everyone's life is different. Right? They're all doing everything digitally and flexibly and on demand. So insurance not being at that point stands out even more like a sore thumb than it used to. I don't think we get the pass we used to, where people are like, oh, it's my insurance. It's, it's slow, it's difficult. So it is what it is. That's just not acceptable anymore.
Yeah, talking about when you made the leap. I mean, you made the leap into Insurtech before Insurtech was a term, right?
It was a word. I'll give it. Yeah, I wasn't like, look, I'm an insurance guy, so I'm risk averse by nature. So I wasn't quite when people hadn't decided if there's an E between insure and tech or not.
Wait. Now we got to pause on that one, because
Yeah.
we had a great debate on the E in Insurtech or not E. What is the official stance? Where have we done
official
now?
is a tough question, because InsurTech Connect is like, the conference that everyone wants to go to. They have an E in it. I don't spell it with an E. Many of the folks that I interact with don't spell it with an E. So I'm like, it's all about efficiency, right? Fewer letters, like learn from Cap and Crunch. He just needed an apostrophe. Let's do the same thing with InsurTech. So I say drop the E. I think my friend Caribou Honig might disagree with me on that, but that's okay. We'll let that be their brand name, and the thing will just not have an E in the middle.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We dropped the E on ours as well, as you may have noticed. But we had that the debate, the really important debate: is there an E or not? Well, you started to talk about this, but the premise behind your book, this idea of being
Yeah.
stuck, trying to get beyond it. What made you, just kind of more of a personal question, what made you decide to write a book? I mean, that's a relatively big undertaking, right? And
Yeah.
I know I will never, ever write a book because it's just too much work.
Well, not with that attitude, Dan, right? You got to take it up.
Yeah.
But so in all fairness, this is that book was actually my third book. So I had written two others, and perhaps because they were in the self-help and personal development space, I, was willing to take on the challenge. But actually, for people who knew me from that side, then they're like, wait, you're writing a business book about insurance. And actually, they're all self-help books. And the reason why is my prior books are about like you facing a challenge and you need to overcome it. You don't know how, right? It's difficult. It holds us down, anxiety, whatever else it might be. It's really not that dissimilar from what I was observing and living actually in the insurance world. We need to move forward. But we're facing all these challenges. We've got legacy technology, or maybe we don't have it anymore, but the process of not having it ever anymore hurt us. Like too expensive, too long, too painful. The CIO's gone now, whatever it might be. The either the legacy tech or getting past it is hurtful and hard. People are risk averse or change averse. Politics, whatever it might be, things hold us back. And I was able to navigate those difficulties in selling for this Insurtech, or else we wouldn't be around, or they wouldn't still be around. Um, but I'm not one for let me just solve it for you. I want to help more broadly, and that's why after a year of saying I'm not really a sales guy, but I'm doing sales, I was like, okay, well, it's time for me to not really be a sales guy. I wanted to help the industry with, with this self-help challenge that it had. And that's where the notion of both starting the business, but more importantly, putting the book out to share stories of carriers who, have gone up against these things that hold us back
Yeah.
and actually have been able to move forward. So that's the first book is, it sort of became a must do. It got to a point where I knew these stories from going around the market and talking to peers when I was at a carrier, but then also at an insurtech. These stories had to come out because for each one of those other carriers that's sitting there saying we can't, whether that's a CEO or uh, anyone really, like someone taking first notice of loss, you're feeling stuck.
Yeah.
The reality is we can. You just need some clarity and some guidance and maybe a bit of inspiration to overcome those barriers.
Yeah, it's actually interesting, and I knew you had written the InsurTech book. I don't think I knew, to be honest with you, that you'd written the personal help book. But the theming is so important, right? Because there is a little bit of stepping up
Yeah.
as an industry to want to look at this in a different light, and putting it into the self help kind of context really is insightful. So on the first book, and then this book that you're working on is a little bit of the kind of where do we go? How do we
Yeah.
get unstuck is not the words that you use, right? But kind
Yeah.
of moving forward, tell us a little bit about the second book, the motivation for it, the
Yeah.
theming. I know it's not out yet. And when is the
Not yet.
publication date, by the
It's
way?
getting
Is there a set
close.
date?
So yeah, I'm going to do this, right? I'm going to put this out there.
Oh,
Um,
hey, breaking news live. I love this. This is fantastic. We got a scoop on our
yeah.
hands.
So I'm lucky enough to get to chair a number of events for Reuters events, and one of them this summer is called "The Future of Insurance," which is the name of my book series. I name my books first. I will just say that. Um, but that event is June 22nd to 24th, and I launched the first book during one of their events last year, so I'm going to do that this year. So that sticks a date on it. I think it's the 23rd, but it all depends when my actual talk happens in that. So 22nd to 24th, at least that gives me a day or two of leeway to be behind. But actually, the book is getting close to being finished, or at least the first draft is.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, congratulations on the
Thank
upcoming
you.
publication. I'm glad would share that news with folks. We are also, by the way, awarding copies of the upcoming book to folks who are in attendance today. So a little incentive for watching it live versus watching it later on recording. So let's talk about the new book.
Yeah.
The extent you can give us some hints
Yeah,
about what we're going
absolutely.
to
Well,
see.
and here's what's interesting. The first book was all legacy carriers. And one of the challenges the legacy carriers face is all these startups, right? And I say that kind of facetiously, but it's like, these disruptors who are jumping in and they don't have any of the constraints we have. And so they have it easy and they're doing all this stuff and customers love them for it, but they're not giving us any credit for all the hard things that we have to do. So I figured if I'm telling that story the first time around, the second time around, let's look on the other side of the table and see what's going on with the startups. Because the reality is, what I've learned is like the grass is not green anywhere unless you garden. So it's very easy to judge, well, the startups don't have any of these problems, they have it easy. And it's really easy for some of these startups to look at legacy carriers, and I heard this time and time again, oh, these dinosaurs, they're going to be gone in 5 years. And see, we have someone from State Farm. I had an Insurtech carrier startup founder, it's a long title, at ITC tell me how State Farm's going to be gone in 5 years. And I'm just thinking, like, right. And I'm sure you're the one who's going to put them out of business. And guess what? If ITC happened in 2020, he probably wouldn't have been there. And I'm pretty sure State Farm would have been. So this whole like us versus them, or it can only be one or the other, I think is absurd. The reality is both sides are very interesting, have lots of challenges, and have lots of lessons. So I told the legacy story. I want to tell the startup story. And that's what this book is a number of startup carriers who, we got into their genesis story and their pivots and their challenges and their wins and some of them not wins. And what do they learn from that? So, really exciting, very cool stories across different lines of business, different customer segments. For me, as a PNC guy, it was neat to branch out a bit into. We have a dental carrier in there called Beam, who just had another raise. Awesome company. And then I can't name them yet because I haven't done their interview or gotten them to sign the release, but also a healthcare startup carrier, which is super fascinating to me. So a really cool mix of companies across the spectrum in this one.
Well, that's great. And we're teasing people with, potentially getting a copy of your book, which is great. And you've been kind enough to agree to come speak at our FinTech and InsurTech Generations Conference in June. We didn't get the book release, but maybe next time we can beat out Reuters for the book release date.
But I am bringing some friends. I'll bring some of the
You are.
founders
That's what
with
I
me.
wanted to talk
Yeah.
about, right? So talk about what that talk is going to be, because here you're talking about some of the hints of what's coming, and I know
Yeah.
I'm kind of going out of order a little bit, but tell
It's
us about
fine.
what's going to happen at the event in June and who you're bringing with.
So the first one who's confirmed is a guy named Jim Albert, who founded a company called Neptune Flood that, as of the current draft, is the first case in the book. But it's a flood insurer. And that's a space that just has not changed forever, and then suddenly has gotten some interest. And frankly, Dan, we were talking before we kicked this off about insurance that needs to exist. Because why does insurance exist in the first place? It's to put people's lives together at the absolute worst moments they've ever gone through, or to make those moments non-issues for them so they can go about their lives or their business. That's a really noble and important mission. So I'm one who wants to celebrate insurance and not fall into like, oh, it's boring and people don't like to talk to me at dinner parties or whatever. Flood insurance is one of these things that needs to exist. My house was flooded and wasn't covered, so I feel that personally. So Jim is one of the people who will be there. And what I want to get into is, in the talk is their stories, the lessons, what's really interesting about it. Jim's case, or Neptune's case in the book, he's really candid about these moments that he calls them the "this is it" moments, where it's like, look, we're at this crossroads, and depending which one I choose or which way things play out, we will either exist or we won't. And sometimes you know it when you're in the midst of it. And sometimes you look back and you're like, thank goodness we turned left, because if we didn't, that'd be it. Really interesting situations.
Yeah, sorry. Is that part of the theme for our event today is making compliance sexy again, right? And
Yeah.
that compelling nature that you just spoke to so well, is that part of this the sexiness? I mean, the impacting people's lives of being there at critical moments, or is it something beyond that? Talk a little bit about
Yeah.
what you think needs to happen here.
Well, I think it's a mix of two things. One is, going back to my self-help book background, I'm a big believer in having a purpose or a why.
Hmm.
And so I think it's really important. I mean, this is how I open my books with a dedication to all the people who are out there, standing by customers at the worst moments of their lives. Like, this is important stuff. When a tree falls through your house and you don't know where your kids are going to sleep, when the person sitting next to you in the car is no longer living, when, your company fails, and then what happens to your shareholders, whatever the situation may be. So remembering that purpose is really critical. And I think in compliance in particular, that can be a tough thing, because you're not at the coal face with the customers. You're not living their pain on a day-to-day basis. And you're living with a lot of the difficulty or the minutia or the things that are held up in that challenge bucket in the industry. So it's easy to feel beaten down. And all too often in this industry, and this is kind of the crux of why we're here today, compliance is seen as an adversary.
Hmm.
It's what you have to work around or hide from as long as you possibly can until the last minute, and then just go over their head and get someone to push it through anyway. And
Just jam it
that's
down their throats. It'll be fine.
yeah, like, oh, they don't understand. They're just difficult. They're going to say no anyway. Or because they don't understand, they're always going to say no instead of let's figure it out. Well, let me ask you a question. If that's the way you're operating, that you tell them at the last minute and you give them as little detail as possible and you don't explain the business goal that you're seeking, how could they possibly say yes and help you get to an answer and figure it out? Because they don't even know what they're figuring for. So, like, this is what's fundamentally broken is in compliance in insurance is not the enemy, it's not the adversary, unless you make it that. And that's been a big difference in these cases. And, I mentioned Jim. That was a key thing for Neptune. He had a chief compliance officer in his hiring plans down the road as he built out the company. But one of his early investors who came from the banking side knew all too well, look, you get compliance wrong from day one, you're going to be backtracking. You may run out of runway and then your company doesn't exist anymore. But if you get it right, it can be a major strategic unlock. So that was the first thing that they hired after they got their investment was a chief compliance officer. And Jim like got religion. He
Yeah.
was like, how did we not have this sooner? And it's been this huge unlock for them, even getting down to the technical side where their ability to code and release rate changes, new rating models as they learn from the risks that are coming in. That's really driven not by their coders being excellent, which they are. It's driven by the things that their chief compliance officer put in place so they could do that. Because if you file wrong, you can't release new rating every few days.
Yeah. Yeah. Wait, so let's dive into that just a little bit more too, which is I think a lot of startup founders, and as you know, we run an accelerator program like the ones you're mentoring in, and we believe what you believe, which is compliance on board early helps you build the foundation to get pointed in the right direction. Some of the pushback we've heard, I'm curious to see if you've heard it as well, is that hey, when you're trying to change things, compliance is just going to tell you no all the time. And I know how we respond to that, but how do you respond to
Yeah.
that when you're talking to startup founders and you're trying to convince them of that and they go, no, you don't get it. They're just going to try and stop us from making progress happen. How do you
Yeah.
respond to that?
Well, look, there's examples of that and there's examples of not that. And what it boils down to is how you engage with them. It goes right back to the same point. So,
Mm.
one of the companies in the book is called Kin. So, it's a homeowners insurer focused on Florida and they're expanding out. They had a lot of trouble with compliance in their fronting carrier. They started as an MGA, so they had a reinsurer and a fronting carrier. And if you look into it, they had all these like stories of how difficult the fronting carrier was and how everything was a no. And so they started to ask, like, well, is it illegal? And when the answer was no, it's like, okay, then it's not no, it's just really hard. But we're engineers. That's what we do. Like, give engineers a no and they will find a solution for it. But for the fronting carrier, what if you listen to their side of the story, you had these upstart people who didn't understand the space, who are trying to do things that have never been done, who are dropping it on them last minute, who aren't
Mhm.
explaining the reasoning for it or why it could work, who don't seem willing to talk through it or listen to it. So what do you expect their response is going to be? I wouldn't want to deal with that, and I'm open to all this stuff. So I think it really it behooves us to look back on how we're engaging with them, and it's okay if they say no. It's all about how you're willing to talk through that and say, okay, well, maybe no to this, maybe I don't understand that, but let me step back and explain to you what we're trying to achieve. So like one of the examples was Kin wanted to text all of their insureds before a hurricane hit to say, hey, hurricane coming, I'm sure you already know, but click here if you have a claim and you can start that process, and here are tips to be safe, or something to that effect.
Right.
And the fronting carriers compliance people, no, 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 you can't do that. And that's just going to ruin our capacity. We can't handle the flood of incoming FNOL. And by the way, these are win losses, so the deductible's really high, so we're probably not even going to be covering these. So all you're doing is ruining everything for everyone. And Kin did it anyway. So like, okay, that's probably like it was a good customer move,
Mhm.
perhaps, although a lot of those claims weren't covered. So maybe that doesn't feel great for the customers, um, but it's not a good partner move. And so, what can you learn in that? And how can you engage differently? And maybe doing it right before the last minute wasn't the right time to engage in that conversation. Maybe talking about how you want to see the claims flowing and thinking bigger picture about it is a better way to go about it than just like, we're going to do this. no, you can't. Okay, well, we're doing it anyway. So, what are you going to do? Because the storm's coming. You're not going to shut us down now.
Yeah.
It's again, it's this adversarialness. They have changed. They're not with their fronting carrier because they're their own carrier now, but they have a different attitude towards compliance and a different attitude towards their openness with, those strategic and procedural decisions that they're making, partially because they learned the hard way. And you see a totally different story for the carriers who are like, no, we were really upfront and open from day one, and that was transformative.
Yeah. So you've already started to hit on this a little bit, but guys, I think of the work you're doing, and I think I'm older, so hopefully people still remember this book, Good to Great, that Jim Collins wrote. But the idea of talking to CEOs and founders and extrapolating from storytelling the theme lines, right? So give us a little teaser on what are the, and you, like I said, you've already hit on a couple of them. What are the other theme lines going to be for this new book, and what are you
Yeah.
discovering as you look across multiple interviews with multiple founders?
Yeah. So one of them that I think will resonate with every founder is capital.
Hmm.
And I think the presumption is that means investment dollars, right? It does, but it's not that limited. So if you're starting up, particularly a carrier or some incarnation of that, whether it's an MGA or a full stack carrier, yes, you need investment dollars, and how you engage with those investment dollars matters. And again, it's similar to the compliance stories. How open are you being? It's really tempting to tell as good a story as you can, and I've got plenty of founders who are like, oh, and we're talking to this company and we're bring them on as a customer. And then you get behind the scenes and it's like, well, you had a LinkedIn message with them. They're not a customer yet. And maybe you should be careful about how I just had this 2 days ago, really pushing too much on trying to sound big. So being more honest about where you are, why you are, and what you're trying to achieve. And the right investor will stand by you, not just then with their dollars, but you're going to need them beyond that. And so being open and honest and strategically aligned with your investors, one side of that capital question. But the other is if you're a carrier or an MGA, you need capacity. So another kind of capital. So, and this is sort of to the kin story, but also others in the book like Thimble, which is an episodic and subscription small commercial insurance solution. Really cool approach. They work with Markel very closely as their capacity. And that is really honest, really open, really aligned. And they're doing things that are very different. So, as a contrast to what happened with Kin, Markel and Thimble have been in lockstep even when they disagreed. They worked through it together to have the right solution with regulators and have the backing behind them. And that just works so much better. So, thinking about the honesty, the strategic openness and alignment with any kind of capital, whether it's your backing capital or the investment that you seek. So that's a major one, obviously, for startups. And these being startup carriers, obviously, it's going to hit on the capacity one in particular, more so than if you were a tech solution that carriers were buying.
Yeah, it's interesting, in the startup world, in the tech world, outside of fintech and insurtech, you hear the advice to fake it till you make it all the time, which is almost the antithesis of what
Yeah.
you kind of just said, right? The transparency, the honesty, because in the insurtech world, faking it is almost never going to be a good thing, is it?
Yeah. Well, I did some work with another startup pre-money
Hmm.
and helped them with their raise, and the pitching started to get uncomfortable. Where every meeting, all those deals were further along in the pipeline, even though like we had just gone from one pitch to the next, and it got to a point where they were getting close to their raise, and one of the investors said, we'd like to see the contracts. Well, what do you do then? Like it's all going to get exposed. So to think that you can fake it till you make it really doesn't work because they are going to find out the emperor has no clothes pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I err on the side of honesty. I mean, think if you're in the insurance world, you need your insurers to be honest with you. Why would you act any differently with them or with anybody else?
Yeah,
So
that
yeah,
makes sense. I know we talked about the first book was more from a legacy carrier perspective. This one is more with startup founders. Um, it- Compare and contrast this topic. Compliance being sexy. Is it more advantageous for the startups because they start with the clean slate you were
yeah.
talking about? Does this still apply to legacy carriers? I'm interested in your perspective because you have this wealth of data on both.
Yeah, there's no question the rule is the same in either case. And this is one of those like grass is greener stories, right? So the legacy folks can be, well, they have a clean slate. They have nothing to worry about. So of course they can do it right. And they don't have 50 years of this difficulty and they don't have all these states or all these products where it's so much harder. They're doing one thing in 3 states. So they can say it's easy to work hand in hand. But, by the same token, they don't have anything in place. So they may not even have a compliance person or process or filings or seasoned paper or any of the other stuff that you have and don't need to think about. So really interestingly, one of the stories is, I thought this is a cool way to end the book. So it's the last one, is a carrier called Mobilitas, which is a startup mobility focused carrier built within CSAA, so the largest AAA carrier in the country. So that's kind of a cool one because it's a startup, but it's part of a legacy operation. And so seeing where they divide the lines to let Mobilitas be free, but also how can Mobilitas leverage things that exist within the CSAA umbrella to their advantage. And one of them was CSAA had a company that they had licensed in all these states that had seasoned paper that they weren't using as many carriers do. And
Mhm.
so they renamed that company as one of the two underwriting companies in Mobilitas. They have a surplus lines and an admitted carrier. So that allowed Mobilitas to move much faster in their expansion, or actually their original launch, because they didn't have to wait around for states that were critical to that initial launch for them. So that's an interesting one. So, yeah, clean slate on the startup side, but legacies have some advantages too. So I think the rule is the rule, and we can't argue our way out of it or think someone else has it easier, so we're just stuck the way we are. If that's your attitude, then that's exactly what you're going to experience.
Yeah, the grass is always greener comment you made earlier, right? Unless you're in a
Yeah.
garden.
My whole yard is brown, so
It's
I
right.
don't
It's
care
all
anymore.
it's all scorched earth. It's
That's
fine. No.
right.
I have a couple more questions for you, but I do want to prompt folks, if you have questions, so feel free to put them in the chat here. We'll be able to fire those away as well. So feel free to throw questions in the chat. The overall advice then, right? I think what we talked about that there's, when it feels like the people you've talked to have recognized that there's some dangers or take that as a warning sign and have actually turned that kind of an advantage. So I guess maybe there's a good kind of wrap up question too of the themes that you've seen from people who've done this successfully and taken the attitude you just articulated rather than the woe is me, but more
Yeah.
aggressively said, how do we turn this into an advantage?
Yeah. I think that this problem is super pervasive. Like, it's really similar actually to heart issues in the country, which is the number one killer out there. So for anyone life insurance or health insurance, you already know this stuff. Um, to me, the compliance problem or the attitude towards compliance is a silent killer.
Hmm.
So you probably don't even know you have a problem. I think you know if you don't have one. If you feel productive and collaborative, and look, like whether you're a startup or an incumbent, like you want to turn out new product, you want to try new things. All of your marketing has to go through compliance because the way that you talk to the market is regulated and you can and can't say certain things. So if you don't have a well functioning relationship, you're probably just like, it's like a low grade fever.
Hmm.
But if you're free of it and you feel awake and alive and like we can do what we want to do and we can market, and we can flex on our product and we can put in new rates or we can try this new way of interacting with our customer and we launched it really fast, you'll know. So I think this is one of those silent killers that like it's low grade fever holding the industry down. It's not necessarily killing it,
Yeah.
but that's not a great way to live. And if you're free from it, I think you feel it. And this is not a startup or a legacy thing. I think the attitude with compliance is something we can all change, and it's an easy one to test. Is do you have the voice of compliance in those strategic discussions you're having? Are they a
Yeah.
part of your leadership? Are they a part of your product development, your marketing efforts from the very start? The answer is yes. Fantastic. Maybe ask them how they feel about it, because it's not just there, but you want them to be genuinely a part of solving the strategic things that you face.
So and I want to make sure I understand your point on that. So that the silent killer is the attitude of how people have looked at compliance as a business prevention
Yeah.
department versus a business acceleration department. Is that the gist? Is
Yeah.
that the main theme?
I think not seeing it as a strategic benefit and a strategic advantage is what's holding us back. So I don't think we have a mortality issue. I don't think the industry is going to die because of it, but it certainly is a morbidity issue. This is like the ongoing chronic illness that we suffer with that we don't have to.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Well, I'm going to call and see if we have some questions from the folks listening in as well, but also remind people Brian's going to be with us at FinTech and Insurtech Generations in June. And this conversation was a sneak peek at some of the theme lines and learnings from his latest book that's coming out right after the conference, as a matter of fact. And then at the conference, you're going to be able to bring some of the people that you interviewed for the book with you along, which I think is going to be a fantastic event. And hopefully this is a nice teaser for it. It looks like, I'm not sure we're going to questions for anyone, which is fine. One of the other things, though, in doing the book that you discovered that you really didn't expect to discover, right? I mean, I think that the silent killer theme line, I think I sense that you might have known that from the earlier book, and you wanted to see if it was true in the startup world. But what did you learn from this one that really surprised you, that maybe was different in the startup world than the legacy carriers?
Well, I think there's a little bit of selection bias on my part. So I'm pro the industry. I'm pro there being insurance. I think it's a good thing. So inherently, the companies that I wanted to have in the book are also positive. So I wasn't looking for people who came in saying, Dana, like the guy who was ripping on State Farm before. I'm not interested in that. And I had some companies that, like, when I had my initial call with them, the CEO's basically telling me, like, this is the stupidest industry in the world. Everyone's going to be gone in 5 years. And so I'm like, well, what's the takeaway then? Like, the solution, the strategic insight is hire you. That's I don't know what the learning is. So as much press and marketing pizzazz as some of the louder negative voices towards the industry have had, as from some of the startup carriers, that's not what I got. But again, I was intentional about that, because I don't think that's interesting. I think what's interesting is, again, going back to the purpose of this, there's hundreds of thousands of people in the US and abroad working very hard to try to get people's lives back together, with a gray cloud over their head from all of the kind of like, oh, your insurance company's here to screw you over. It's, they're terrible, they're boring, they're not helpful, etc. So to get up every day, I ran claims. So, like, my people were on the front line getting calls from people who'd gone through something and expected the person on my team to be talking down to them or not helpful. So when you're trying to help someone and their assumption is you're the enemy, you can imagine how those calls start and how you feel about that, right? So I did want to have a more positive spin on it, and that really is what came through. Each one of the startups had a genuine reason for wanting to exist, and it wasn't about the stupidity or ineptitude of anything. It might have been about seeing a problem or thinking the insurance industry isn't solving for that problem right now, but not in a pejorative way or a dismissive way. More like, we have some advantages that maybe an existing carrier doesn't have. And if we don't put those to good use, shame on us, because people are hurting and there's real opportunity. So I was able to find very successful startups, actually, not just on the fringes, that both believe in insurance and are doing something different and doing it well. And that was, that was refreshing, because I wasn't sure how much of a struggle it would be to keep that sort of ethical, like, this is not a terrible place to be mindset. But I was able to do that.
It's clear you're a strong advocate for the industry and in the industry's mission, to your point. And I'm going to try and connect those dots of, the theme here about compliance being sexy, which of course is a little tongue in cheek, but certainly compliance is a core strategic advantage if you have the right attitude, if you approach it correctly, and it allows you to facilitate your mission of impacting people's lives more efficiently, higher productivity. As a matter of fact, you can't achieve your mission without it. So I'm going to try and connect those two theme lines there. But Bryan, I know with Insurance Evolution Partners, they can get a hold of you there, because I know you're not only an author, but you do work with people directly on that too. And I love the attitude you bring, the advocacy you bring for the industry. It's great to have met you through this process, and I'm looking forward to the event at FinTech Generations. I know we put in the chat and we'll put this for when we post it to our channel for later, for folks who are watching it later, a discount code for FinTech and Insurtech Generations, with the idea to come and obviously hear Bryan and lots of other great people later on. I will do two things, Bryan. I will say thank you for taking the time to be with us for our quarterly event here with the RevTech Labs and Insurtech community. and I'll also give you the opportunity for last word. If there's something we didn't cover or that I was supposed to ask that I missed somewhere along the way, or just kind of ending theme lines, I'll give you the floor and the last word.
No, I appreciate that. So I do think, I think we got into a good conversation around both the backstory with the first book, but what's going on with the second one. And hopefully that's interesting to people and give some thoughts and some insights, whether you're in a startup or not. These stories are interesting regardless of your current context. We're giving away some copies of the book, but I'm also discounting the current book for folks who are here. So if you go to future-of-insurance.com/QC you get more details there, including a way to pre-order the next book if you're interested in it.
We got our own code, man. We've made it. This is it.
QC
We got the
FinTech,
announcement date for the new book. We got a discount code with our name on it. I mean, this is big time.
Reuters doesn't have a discount code, so you won on that one.
Eat your heart out, Reuters.
That's
there
right.
you go. There you go. Well, thank you again. I think it's been a great conversation. For those of you listening in, thanks. For those of you watching it later, we'll make sure we get those codes in the chat there so you can take advantage of it. But Bryan, I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to June because of the conference and your new book coming out. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dan. And to all of you for being here and making this happen.
Fantastic. Thank you all. We'll see you later. Thanks for being with us today.